Hello, comrades. This is going to be a quick and easy video where I'm just going to share some typical American phrases that you can use to impress your clients. So if you work with Americans or trying to get to that market, this is going to be a good kind of cheat sheet, if you will, of some typical words and expressions, some funny, some a little bit more serious, but both very understandable for kind of the majority of customers you're going to be reaching out. But the key here, as I mentioned in the previous video about branding, is the key here is to differentiate yourself from others, right? So to kind of make yourself stand out. So if you're reaching out or if you're kind of getting a call or writing an email, using one of these few expressions that I've mentioned before in my videos and I'm kind of talking about right now and will be sharing today is going to kind of make you a little bit more memorable, right? Oh, that fun guy, he just used that interesting expression. Maybe it sounded weird, but kind of, again, your goal is to stand out, to be a little bit more memorable than just a generic, hey, how's it going? We're offering these services at a cheaper price kind of thing, right? So why do you need those, right? Again, we understand this kind of simplicity of making yourself stand out a little bit, right? The easy way. But why else would you need these kind of expressions? Well, also imagine a foreigner talking to you and using an expression that only you and your friends knew, kind of the locals, the natives, if you will. Imagine how that would make you feel. It would make you feel a little bit more personable with this person, right? So let's go on and get some of these expressions today. My former boss at Apple once told me, people will never remember what you've said, but they would always remember how you made them feel, right? It's the concept of perception. Perception equals reality. And in this case, you're going to make someone feel like you're genuinely trying to connect with them, right? And that's worth a lot, trust me. So the first phrase for today is a piece of cake. So when an American says something is a piece of cake, they don't refer to a tasty treat, as you may think right away. What they want to say is that a task or a specific job that they're referring to, or maybe some action, is straightforward and easy. So next time an American colleague or a partner or a potential customer or client asks you to complete a job that you think is fairly straightforward and simple, just tell them it'll be a piece of cake. I think that should put a smile on their face. And if they ask you, why do you think that would be a piece of cake, you can tell them that that's because it's not your first rodeo. Now, that is going to definitely lighten them up a bit. What that means, not being a first rodeo, is that you've been successful at this particular type of task before, right? And are confident that you're going to do this well again. What's interesting is the origin of this expression comes from the American South, right, where they enjoy their rodeos. And a rodeo isn't really that simple of a task. I mean, look them up online. It takes a lot of training and courage and a lot of things, right? So if you're saying that this is not your first rodeo, or like they say in the South, it ain't my first rodeo, that means that this specific task is something that you've done before and are completely sure of, and sure of your abilities to kind of fulfill it, if you will. Now, if someone asks you a question that you do not wish to answer, and you feel like it's an appropriate time to make a joke, that's important, you can use the next expression. You can plead the fifth. Now, pleading the fifth is a reference to the Fifth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which allows a witness in court to refuse questions on the grounds that they risk self-incrimination. This expression is generally used as a joke, where you either think of the answers pretty obvious, and you say, I'm going to plead the fifth on this one, it's kind of understandable for everyone, or when you don't want to ruin the surprise, right, and you just say, oh, we're going to plead the fifth on whatever situation. There are, however, sensitive situations where you might want to think twice before impressing someone with your rich vocabulary. So let's say a client asks you who is to blame for, let's say, a missed deadline. And you say, if you don't mind, I'd like to plead the fifth on this one. This could lighten them up a little bit, but as you might have already guessed, it can also confuse the person even more. It's like, why doesn't he want to answer a straightforward question? So be very sensitive as to when to use this particular expression, or any expression, especially the ones that are kind of funny, but could be offensive or not appropriate. So context, as I mentioned before, in many of my videos, context is king here. But while we're on the topic of jokes, I'll give you a typical American name for someone who thinks they know it all. And in the States, they call this person an armchair quarterback or an armchair general. An armchair general is someone who believes that they're smarter than an expert in a specific field. So they're sitting in their chair, criticizing someone who's spent their entire life studying a subject. Quite a lot of armchair generals out there on the internet, don't you think? But let's not get there. Now, moving on to the next expression, and that is when someone says that something is not rocket science. Now, I think this one is pretty self-explanatory. What it means is that something is so obvious, not complicated, and therefore not something you'd study like rocket science. So if an American client or partner asks you to do something that is a piece of cake, right, as we mentioned, you can tell them it's not rocket science, and you're going to finish the task without any external help. But be careful as not to sound condescending. You don't want your client to feel stupid or less than. And if you don't deliver on your promise, that happens sometimes, right? In the service industry we're in, things come up and intervene our spiel, our path, and kind of ruin the expectations a little bit, right? You may get upset because of that and start blaming yourself, blaming others, all the external factors that happen, right? But if that happens, an American may suggest you to not cry over spilt milk. It's a popular phrase that is usually offered to someone who becomes upset over a thing or situation that cannot be fixed. Just like when you spill milk, you can't really put it back in the bottle. I mean, you can, but it'll be kind of nasty. So when something doesn't go according to your plan, don't cry over the spilled milk. Or suggest it to others. Again, be careful with clients. You don't want to be like, we've missed the deadline, but don't you cry over the spilled milk. That might, bite you in the ass, as I like to say. The next phrase is quite interesting, and it is to table an item. Tabling an item is an American English phrase that has different connotations when an American or an Englishman speaks to one another. In American English, table an item translates to putting something aside for consideration at another time. For a British English speaker, the phrase means discussing the issue and making a decision. That's what I'm kind of used to, right? So be aware of that difference when you speak to an American or a Brit. The next phrase I want to share with you is one of my favorite. Jump on the bandwagon. Jumping on the bandwagon means that someone is supporting a cause or joining a popular trending activity. So for example, Americans who've been supporting their small local team for years and it's just started winning, big and becoming famous, or as you say, making headlines, they call the new fans of their local team as ones who just jumped on the bandwagon because the team is currently successful. Or for example, a new popular social media platform comes out and everyone's jumping on the bandwagon. And hey, as you can see, I myself just recently jumped on the bandwagon of YouTube's bandwagon, right? So there it is. Now, you know the meaning. Now, what you do think it means, it doesn't necessarily translate to the sort of the real meaning, right? So be careful with this particular saying, right? Be careful with this particular phrase, as I mentioned with others as well, because the meaning, again, is dictated by the context. So what you understand, what you think it means, doesn't necessarily mean it, if you know what I mean. Mean. You get it. Now, what would you say, and in this context, so if you might not know what it means, what would you say if someone says that they want to throw you under the bus, or they threw you under the bus? Pretty scary, right? I mean, nothing good. And you'd be right about that. When an American uses this expression, it's an indication that someone or a group of people has betrayed you in order to, for example, secure their own advancement at work. Have you ever been in a situation when you enter, when you either, step in and, or have someone else step in and, start working on a project, and then the project just kind of collapses and the original team throws you under the bus because you've helped or were kind of there? So it's usually a negative connotation. The task usually involves a bunch of people, right? So you don't want to blame a person and throw someone under the bus just to take the blame for everything that happened, for everything that went wrong. There's another saying kind of around this is, the teamwork and the kind of organization of processes, right, that you have at work requires a lot of communication. So again, not throwing anyone under the bus, but instead stepping up to the plate is something that I would recommend doing, right? Step up to the plate. That's another expression, stepping up to the plate. And stepping up to the plate means taking ownership of the situation, right? So it means showing up, right? It means delivering and bringing your best abilities and your confidence to the table, right? To the situation. Just like you did when you started watching this video. You stepped up to the plate, you wanted to learn something new, a few expressions to use at your kind of work or with Americans, and you've stepped up to the plate. So to that, I appreciate it. I hope you're not going to throw me under the bus if these expressions don't really work out for you. So I really hope those were not rocket science, and you can use them in your work and your life with kind of the connection with American culture, clients, or any English-speaking person who's a little bit more versed on this topic and has better, richer vocabulary. Yeah, as always, I try to make these quick and easy for you. Not planning on turning this into a monetization project. This is just for me to share some of these fun tips and interesting to some of you expressions. And even though I don't have that many views or that many subscribers, it is a way for me to kind of express myself and enjoy it instead of turning it into something that it's not. So as always, if you have been, thank you for watching.